All right, what's going on, everyone? Hope we're doing well and that we are chilling on this fine day. Now, I know that there are not enough AMC videos on the internet, so I really wanted to give my take on this because I think it brings something different to the table. So, I'm not a big technical analysis person. I prefer doing fractal slash cycle analysis, but I understand that TA is really important. And a majority of the time when it comes to my TA, I'll just do levels. But I wanted to highlight something, and that is a fractal that was found by another YouTuber. His name is, he goes by Booksy, and I will put a link to his channel in the description. I think it's a very, I think it's a breakthrough thing. And I believe that he's covered it a fair amount of times in his videos, but because fractal analysis isn't really taken that seriously, it was kind of just ignored. But I'm going to shed some light on it and I'm going to use it to paint a bigger picture as to where I think this stock is going to go for maybe the next year or even maybe 3. And without further ado, let me just show you. Let's get into it, right? So, fractal is this right here. And we can see it through, I guess it doesn't really matter where I start over here. Let me just, I'll highlight the run up, right? To make it easier. All right, so this, I don't know what we're dealing with. We have a similar bottom pattern here where it's a double bottom and the second bottom is a little diagonal relative to the first point. And see a similar trend, kind of. Paint the picture. And what I'm gonna do is use snipping tool because the crosshair Weeble has is kind of garbage. So let's see. So we have this cup here. You can see here, double bottom. Pretty easy to understand. Then we have the top of the March run, right? And then this is where I think we are. Well, not at that exact spot. I think we're over here. And I expect today to be sideways. Because it's in the best interest of the powers that be that it take as long as possible, right? We all understand. We've been here for a while, some of us at least. So I'm assuming with a daily candle to candle assumption that we are on the second one here and that tomorrow we will see a push up to retest 27. Now, I wouldn't usually say it's candle for candle perfect or tracking, but it's just one of those gut feelings, I guess, where you really bring in subjectivity. I mean, it's all over the place when you're doing analysis, but when looking at fractals or cycles, it kind of it's easier to pinpoint. So we could retest, we could just skip this extra candle, this daily candle, and just push up today and retest these levels, right? But going back to where we are in relation to what Booksy found, think it's important to note landmarks, right? So we know that this is the March run, right? And if you notice, you'll see that the top of the cup run went actually above the March run, and we don't get that here. It's actually below. Now, sure, mm, sometimes the cycle within the fractal is interrupted. It's not going to be a perfect one-to-one, as I said before, when it comes to the daily candles, but even though the fractal doesn't play out the same, it ends the same. So, but then again, that's just a belief system in itself. And what I expect is that we will not close the week above 27, or we will, but just barely. So we're gonna have this sideways day right here. Right, this is our second sideways. Tomorrow we'll see a push up to retest 27, and then Thursday we'll have a sideways day. Maybe we hit above 27, but we come back down and we close below it, and then Friday we should close above it. I don't know, that's just a candle for candle assumption. It's a gut feeling, I guess. Now, next week is when we will spend, uh, we will address the last part of the fractal, which is where it completes. And to figure out how where it's going to complete is actually pretty predictable. So what we do is I'm going to delete these because they're giving me an eyesore. And I'm just going to plot the top of the fractal run here, right? Now, what we'll see is that there's a drop down over here. So essentially we can look at this top and deduce that it is a retest of the drop. And we can call this drop the pre-fractal drop into the fractal. So like for instance, when I highlighted this whole area as the fractal, this big giant long phase that we went through was the pre-fractal. Okay, and man, it took a while, but we're here and now we're climbing. So assuming this, we can find where the drop-off point started. I've heard 39.64, I've heard 38, I've heard 37.50. It's kind of, I guess, to be better safe than sorry, we can just put it like here. I think that's fair. Right, that's 37.54. Sure, we'll put it there. So we can assume that from this current point in time, it will be a 51% climb to retest this, and it will fail because, well, people are pissed off, probably just want to get out, and algorithm, I guess. Because, let's see. So here, it retested the drop, it failed. Now, this gap is kind of interesting to me, right? It looks like because this is the end of the cycle and it failed, it dropped, and that this is like the beginning of the pre-fractal, right? So this is kind of a fractal in itself. Let's see. So we have the fractal drop, consolidation, BS, like this area. Then we have the March run here, drop down. It drops below, but not necessarily. And it ultimately pushes back up to retest the top. Now, it forms a double top, as in this phase here retests it, and that's not common. But nonetheless, it respects that. level, and it kind of shows that it is a fractal in itself. And when it got to the end, you'll see it rejected the drop off point. It failed a couple of times. And after it had tested that initial drop into the prefractal, you can see it made way downwards. And when it broke below that crucial point and it went up, it failed, and we saw this markdown phase. Get rid of this though. But thinking that this is the initial point at which the markdown started, we'll see a retest of that and it will fail, especially with Ape coming out and all that jazz. And we will see we would expect a pre-fractal drop. So let's try and figure out where that would exactly go. So looking at this as the fractal, this is the March run, right? Over here is the March top run. This is the cup run, top of the cup run, which is the phase that we're currently experiencing. Like I think we are right here at this little daily candle. It came back down to right about like the midway point of this sideways action that we're experiencing. So let's just I'll just put a line right there. I think that's fair. So we'll mark up tomorrow. We'll start the retest of the 27 level this week, and then next week we'll mark up, and then we will hit 37, we'll mark down, and then this will be your pre-fractal drop, in my opinion, right? And so this gap down is basically, I think, was a matter of fundamentals. I'm not too sure. It's weird to me, right? Because every time that there's a prefractal drop, the bottom, well, I guess I'll get into it later, but let's assume that it kind of plays out the same as this over here. Then we would take a snippet of this. We'd come up, we'd hit it, we drop back down as the prefractal drop, and then maybe we'll go below. I mean, in the fractal over here, we do go below a lot. So this could be just like that area. We'll have this March run, but it won't retest the start or the top of the retest of the drop, right? And it will come back down, and I think it will march lower. So I'm looking at this area here as what I think would happen after a retest here. And we can see that this, I'm looking at that area as this, and this area. But you see, there is something interesting that I'm realizing now, is that yes, there is a gap down. So maybe this small section is another fractal in itself. And that this is a markdown pre-fractal drop here. But that's just like a small iteration within a bigger one. But then again, it is a fractal, so I think let's just assume I'm not gonna try and be perfect, right? So I'm gonna go like this, go lower. It will do some spiky stuff here, and then it will ultimately try and form a cup in which it will retest that drop again, because now once the initial failure here takes place, it will create, I think, a retest zone. And that brings me to the macro side, or the cycle. That is allowed. I'm sorry about that. So, before I even found out about Booksy's fractal, or when I started looking deep into it, I was playing off of this right here. And it looks really ugly at the end, but bear with me, right? So, I thought that this is IPO. So I think that it kind of makes sense that this would be the cycle after IPO, right? It took a while, but eventually a cycle did form. So we have our January to pre-June accumulation phase here. Now, it wasn't as dramatic as it was as we know, but it was certainly slow. And that just, if you remember, a fractal may not play out the same, but the goal is always the same. So we have this markup, we have these downs, ups. Let me see, actually, this might be pretty claustrophobic, but I'm going to try and do some comparisons here. Okay, make it easier to visualize. Man, that is annoying. So this would be your January to pre-June here. You have your June 72 top, and then your little hiccups into some important landmarks. So delete these. This is where I think it's important to pay attention to. This, we all remember how dramatic this moment was. What the hell? So then, looking at the original chart up here, this little guy is, in fact, I think, this guy. Right? Kind of makes sense. We have that drop. Now the top here is on a weekly time frame, the bottom is daily. So you can see how time is different. The March run, this big guy, is the same as this little guy. And the markdown, which we're all familiar with. And when I was looking at this cycle and using it as a guide, I basically just said that this whole area is the bottom, and we're not dropping below this. I expected a run up, and we're running up. So, what about the future, though? See, I think that this is the main cycle, and that Booksy's fractal that he has highlighted is the gears that turn it, that make it possible. So let's go back to what I think will happen. So we have this area. So we're still looking for a retest of that initial drop, right? So like over here, the top of this fractal tested this drop. And now we're looking for a retest of this drop. I don't think it's going to succeed, but I want, let me see if I can show you Booksy's fractal in this period of time. It's kind of difficult. Stop and okay. Snippet. Okay. So after looking at it, this would be considered the top of the March run. Okay. Like here. This is the pre-fractal drop, which, or no, how do I, let me think about this real quick. All right. This doesn't make, yeah, so that's not the March run. This is just the drop, the pre-fractal drop. This is the March run, synonymous with the March run. Then we have these pauses here for run. And then the markdown phase, which is pretty easy to understand, I think. Right, like for here it's this, here it's this, for here it's this. And now this little hiccup guy is part of the cup. I think that this area right here is confusing to me. This thing. It feels like it's playing on such a short time frame. So like, for example, maybe it's this, not the, like before the cup. For here it's this, right? And then we have the infamous cup, in which we ultimately make way for the retest of the pre-fractal drop. There or something. And we get that here. This is really cool because we notice we noticed the initial retest and we didn't close above it on that day. We went the next day. Here we can kind of draw the same conclusion. It's about the day after where a decision is made. It retests it, it doesn't close above it, but it drops. For here, I'm assuming we're going to hit it, not close above it, and then the next day will be red. And then we will cycle through another smaller fractal, the same fractal. So going back to the drawing board, we'll see it come up to retest the initial drop. Then we'll come down, because I don't think it's going to go up. This is just short-term bearish. It will come down. Honestly, I'm thinking, oh, that's right, we have to mark the there. And so we'll come up, we'll reject, we'll come back down, Ooh, this is interesting because this line representing hmm this line that represents the test for the drop back in Jan after the Jan run up kind of could act as an all-time low of this cycle where it like dips below something like this, right? We run up, not retest, come below maybe, or actually after coming up, we'd bounce off of this, come up like this to act as this this top, not retesting the important. But then again, because the smaller fractal tested the top so many times, we could see a drop push up to retest that, but I doubt it. So I'm just gonna say like midway point here and then crash all the way down to 19. Brutal, brutal. And then ultimately make way, but that's too aggressive. Make way for a cup in which we retest that. Now, what's really cool about this is since this acts as a new retest zone, which is basically the same, it alludes to the double top cycle that we looked at before, right? And what's interesting is that this is actually nothing compared to what could happen, because we're all here for a supposed MOAS, right? Well, see, after the IPO cycle finishes, we drop down into this area, okay? Now this is really interesting because the macro cycle kind of becomes a fractal. And yeah, might be assuming a little too much, but can't argue that it does look similar. So down here would be the pre-January run. This would be your June accumulation into your 72 top, right? I think that makes sense. We have our sideways BS that we're all familiar with. And then we have, maybe you could make the case for the, kind of like the March run here. And then the interim V recovery before continued downside, right? And then ultimately we make our way up for a double top, which is what I think the 72 is. Now, this is a different cycle because you'll notice that the support is found here. So we're really hoping that the movement is strong and we find it and we push up, and this would give us all-time high. And then this would probably be like 90 to 100. But because support would be found here as opposed to rejection, which this is kind of what it looks like. This is what the rejection of the main cycle would look like, right? We get instead that support and we make way and we restart the cycle. Now, because we're restarting the cycle, we're ultimately going to make way for a double top, which we get here. We're looking for a double top this range, and then we'll be getting another markdown. Now, it's found again here in this case, and it makes a triple top. Now here, I haven't really been talking about a triple top, but I mean, if we draw a line all the way across, in essence, that triple top is hit, but when we start bringing out words like in essence, it's a little less believable. So for the sake of it though, we could say that we did see a rejection here and that it was just rushed, right? But it did come back down. So this point, at this range, the 90 to 100, this is where it gets really important to hold, because these numbers are going to be scary. If this is your 90 and if this is your 90 to 100 range, we're going to see from 90 supposedly a pretty fast drop down to the, what is that synonymous to, like the 30 to 40 range? Like what? This would be like the lowest point of this cycle. But for this, it would be, once the double top is in at this range, it would drop down to, I guess, 70. This is your 70. So like 60s. And then you can see here that support was found again. And this time, same range, kind of. And this is where the ultimate push comes. The path to MOAS. So what happens after that? Well, we can kind of, I mean, this would be your, I mean, this is like your 200 plus, right? We can figure after this is hit, what happens, right? So this would be your, starting here, your cycle. And then this is your all-time high of the squeeze. And then just drop into struggle. Drop, struggle, drop. And then ultimately death. But because this is COVID era, it's not necessarily fair to compare this to what could happen. So where I see it going, I will show. Now, because I am bullish, first off, I believe that 72 is guaranteed because it's just part of the double top cycle. I can't tell you how to time it, but I can tell you that if you're holding shares, it's a good trade target, in my opinion. Like, not necessarily 72.59, but just 70. Hell, I mean, even 64 is pretty safe, but if you don't want to trade it and you want to hold and try and get that that projection where the triple top after triple top happens, then this is kind of what you're looking at, right? So we come up, we do this thing, we retest here, and then because what history has shown, right, it's like initially rejection here, right? Initial rejection. Over here, it was initial rejection, and then the next day. So we would get initial rejection here, push down a little bit, and then zoom up for the 72 top. We would get rejected here, and we would push down probably, honestly, to like 37. And then we'd V-shaped recovery to 72 again for the triple top. People would probably get worried because we hit 37 and this is a triple top. But it would come down to 52, find support, right? And then the cycle would say, all right, so we have another double top. This is your, I guess, in a very small time frame, this would be pre-fractal drop. And then so on and so forth. So this would be a retest of the pre-fractal drop. And we'd see an initial rejection, probably maybe a double bottom down to 52 again, and then it would just go bananas. And it could be a lot worse. It could be, instead of 37, we could revisit lower levels like 20s, right, to scare you. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to conviction. And let's say, for example, that support isn't found here, right? So we get rid of this because this never happens. And because in the back of our minds, we're all thinking about a crash, right? So maybe we'll get like a trap here, like, oh my God, we found support. And then just down. And then this would be the double top. This would suffice as the cycle being complete, right? I mean, this would literally be this. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. I hope you guys found it interesting. And I might make videos on different sections or other stocks, but for now, I just wanted to get my word in about this. I hope you guys have a good one. Take care. Talk to you later.